When I first covered the Wonderswan version of the original SaGa, or as it's known in the West, Final Fantasy Legend, I was disappointed at the lack of remake in that style for the Wonderswan to fit in well after playing the first game in the series that way. Going back to the Game Boy version of the titles with the crunched text and the small screen size would be very rough, especially after playing the that much easier on the eyes Wonderswan release with the fan translation. What I didn't know at the time was that the developers had also wanted to make a Wonderswan version of the second SaGa title and would end up doing it years later on the Nintendo DS, and thankfully this version also received a fan translation as well, rendering it fully playable in English. Knowing this, I thought it would be a good idea to open up reviews this year the way that I started reviewing games on YouTube in general with the first SaGa game, but also started them off last year with Romancing Saga 2's release on modern systems. It's time to go back to Kawazu's madness with SaGa 2, Hihou Densetsu. SaGa 2 Hihou Densetsu on the Nintendo DS is a much larger overhaul of the original game next to the Wonderswan version of the original title. For starters, the entire game is in full 3D with a free rotating camera, which is quite impressive for a Nintendo DS title. The new visual style looks a lot like that of Romancing Saga Minstrel Song on the PlayStation 2, though obviously not anywhere near as clean since it's on much weaker hardware with a lower resolution. I'm obviously emulating the game for this review, and I tried upscaling it a bit, but it was giving me some performance problems when I tried. Maybe it'll work better for other people on other setups, but for now, this is as good as the game is going to look in this video. The story is very straightforward, in some aspects even more so than the previous title in the series. Your dad was an adventurer who left you and your mother behind, and now you want to set out on an adventure in the hopes of reuniting with him. Before setting off, your classmates decide that they want to go with you to help you achieve your goal. Along the way, you search for special relics that are said to revive the Godess when all of them are collected in one place. For the most part, this story is an excuse plot to get you moving from world to world. While there isn't one big tower connecting all worlds together, every world is connected to a larger tower that bridges one world to the next, giving a similar structure but with a bigger reason to go from place to place rather than climbing past every world in the end. Most towers are sealed by doors that won't open until you've properly collected the relics scattered throughout it, and the relics usually show up in chests in major dungeons or after boss fights. Each world has a smaller story with minor drama between characters there that has to get resolved before you can move on to the next one. A lot of these stories kind of feel like they have a total of 2 sentences of planning before they get padded out to the length of about an hour, and they don't really add anything to the larger narrative. It's like if you took an exaggerated form of the complaints about Kingdom Hearts' story structure, but made them real in a lot of ways. And it's kind of sad because it's perfectly understandable for a Game Boy title, but considering that this is a Nintendo DS remake, it would have been a good opportunity to flesh out these stories a little. Especially since it's sharing a platform with heavy hitters like Radiant Historia, Strange Journey, and Bowser's Inside Story. Not to say the game needs to be at this level, but just stressing what it's going up against on the system of release. Now, before we get started on the combat, I think it's time to properly introduce my team members. SaGa 2 lets you not only pick characters to form your party to your liking, but you've got a lot of cosmetic choices too. Besides just male and female, you've got multiple skins, each with different colors for all of them. I wasn't expecting that much detail to pick from. First off, we've got the party leader, Elfie. This has been my go-to female character name across a lot of games since having read Robin Hobb's Live Ship Traders trilogy. It doesn't really go deeper than that. I like the design more than the other human ones, and that's about it. Next, we've got Scope, a mecha named after Scope Dog from Armor Trooper Votoms. Naruto. I was honestly split between 3 names when I saw this design and color choice, because I could have also gone with Ninja Info Cards or Green Naruto, but I figured just having Naruto there was taking the joke far enough. And finally we have Adol, our red-headed magic-using Esper. Now, anyone familiar with Final Fantasy Legend 2 or SaGa 2 might notice a problem here, and I sure did later on. When I made this party, I figured whoever would die first would get replaced with a monster since they were very low upkeep in the first SaGa title, requiring no equipment or stat investment to stay strong. This was a mistake, as SaGa 2 Hihou Densetsu doesn't use a life point system, so the party you make early on is the party you'll be playing with the entire game. I'm sure for most people that this is a welcome change, though I was hoping to get to experiment a bit more with lineups during one playthrough, and this kinda just stopped it. I'm not blaming the game for this. This one is entirely on me, and it's not like you need specific lineups to do really well in this game either. SaGa 2 is fairly easy during most of it, so in the end it didn't really matter that much. But I won't be able to go into how monsters have changed as much as I would like because of it. Enemy monsters can still drop meat, which upon eating transforms your monster into one of their type, with each type having different stats and abilities. That's as much as I know, since that's also what it was like in the first title. I really do like classes like that, so I'm sad I didn't notice the lack of LP early on, because I was already several hours in before I noticed. Character classes all have their own way of playing, which follows mostly the same rules as the previous SaGa game, though there are some major differences. Humans are the most proficient at using attack equipment, like swords, guns, and taijutsu moves. They don't learn any special abilities, but gain stats after combat at random intervals, as well as increasing their proficiency with said weapons. In the original Game Boy release, the stats they gained were apparently fully random, but in this game it's more in line with the later Romancing Saga titles, giving you stats based on what you need. Do you use swords? Well, they attack with strength, so you gain strength. Do you use taijutsu? Taijutsu is tied to agility, so that's the stat you get. For the most part, it works quite well. Mecha are even more focused on equipment, gaining no stats after combat, but gaining way more bonus stats based on their equipment, often getting nearly double the defensive value per piece of armor equipped. Espers gain special abilities after combat, which are divided into multiple categories, with them changing their subclass category based on what kind of spells you mainly use with them. Adal mainly used offensive spells, so he fell under an offensive subclass, which gave him magical attacks that hit every enemy on the screen. Their abilities take up an equipment slot, and much like Pokemon, Espers are only capable of remembering 4 abilities at a time. Whenever an Esper learns a new ability, they forget their 4th ability, so if you place your least favorite spell at the bottom, that's the one that's going to get replaced. In general, weapons have durability. Each time you use them, durability loses a single point. Once a weapon is out of durability, it's gone. Abilities have a total use instead of an MP system, with the use getting recharged when staying at an inn. There are spellbooks you can equip on characters to let them cast spells that use durability in the style of weapons, and in an equal fashion, gun-type weapons are equipped but get reloaded when resting at an inn as well. Staying at an inn costs as much money as how many points of everything get recharged, counting health, ability points, and gun uses each. I think this is to solve the cost problem the first SaGa game had, where characters using weapons were incredibly expensive to have on board compared to the other types of party members, since they needed to have their basic forms of attacks recharged while the rest could just exist rent-free with no issues. Something that's also compensated by humans no longer just buying their stats in shops, balancing the changes out between humans and espers. Sometimes it feels like you're playing a very standard and typical JRPG, but then you remember that you just watched Naruto's best friend, Scope Dog, gun down terrorists with a machine gun. The old school style of clashing science fiction and fantasy trappings being blended together with no rhyme or reason is something that I can very much appreciate. The relics you find along the way can often be equipped to further raise your stats, which can help you with your character growth besides the stat gains after combat. Multiple of the same type of relic will stack, so if you've got more than one agility relic, equipping it will further boost the agility of the character it's assigned to. The original Game Boy release used a random encounter system as was typical for the time, and the Nintendo DS title instead went for having every monster visible on the screen, just like the Romancing Saga games. To make it even closer to one, if you go into combat with more than one encounter aggroed, the fights get linked into one bigger encounter. Though, with how many group attacks there are on the game, even those don't take too long to get through, as the game in general is still very much designed to be a handheld title played in short bursts. It's almost comical seeing how fast oversized enemy groups can melt in this game. Though, this becomes a bit of a problem by itself because it slows down the game to a crawl. Turn order isn't kind to party members who can clear a lot of enemies in one go, so you're often stuck waiting for over a dozen enemies for them to take their turn already. What does help with this is the special combo attacks that exist, which you can get in exchange for special currencies you get after combat. Clearing fights earns you MP, which can be traded for Threads of Fate. Threads of Fate allow you to use combos, which will pop up during fights and allow you to drag a party member ahead of their turn order with amplified damage. Doing this will also make them focus on the same enemy that the previous character attacked, which in some cases is not what you want. What this results in though is this feeling of over-reliance on RNG. In a lot of cases, your Esper with the big screen nuke is going to have his turn dead last, after the 25 enemies and your 3 other party members, unless he can get in through a combo attack which has its prompt come up randomly. Turn order does have a level of randomization, being mostly based on agility but with some variance added to it, so maybe your main agility character can go first, maybe these 6 enemies go first. Maybe he does go first but nobody wants to combo with him, so you have to wait out the next 4 enemies for another shot at this. Sometimes you really wait all these turns out before the big ice spell kills everything in turn 1 despite taking longer than some of the boss fights. Sometimes the combo happens immediately and the fight ends up incredibly fast. It's not great. Using combos has a bit more to it than just their combat use though. There's multiple forms of fate in this game, representing love, friend, family, ally, hate, strife, loner, and rival. The pop-ups for which one you get to use are randomized, so if you really care about sticking with certain relationships, you do have moments where you have to choose what's more important. This love not turning to hate or getting that sick extra damage in right now. There is a special reason for this too, as there are events that only take place in certain areas when your team has the correct title for them. Most of these are fairly simple side quests that lead to a chest, and overall the majority of this isn't too important, so you shouldn't feel too afraid of missing anything if you play the game. For most of the game, my team was listed as tough love, being a mixture of rivals and love. I liked having a mental image of my team having a complicated relationship between one another where almost everyone loved one person and didn't like another and tried to outdo them. It's a simple mechanic functioning on a level of novelty, representing an idea to let your fantasy run wild, but I do kinda love these sorts of things in games, so it's entirely fine by me. Just like I'm sure there are people who love the idea of demons having invaded a girl's body and you using a special item to shrink in size and enter her body as a dungeon, traveling through floors that are clearly representing her feet. I think I lost my train of thought. Alright, here we go, I found it. A good number of the relics that you find during the course of the game expand your map functionalities, as well as giving you extra abilities to use outside of combat, like being able to excavate hidden treasure or crushing walls, like Dogi. One thing that I'm not a fan of is that you have to equip these abilities individually, and you can only equip one of them. So if you want to change between them, you have to go into your menu and manually equip a different one to use, all for things that could very easily be a context-sensitive input, since in the end, you're just pressing the same button on the special event spot anyway. Speaking of menu clutter, there's very little inventory space in this game. In fact, there's so little that during most dungeon runs I'd go from an empty inventory to standing in front of a chest trying to figure out what items I could chug to open this one. There's absolutely no need for this kind of limitation in a title like this, so I don't understand why this was kept. I guess it prevents me from stocking up on too many strong weapons to keep my humans from running at full power, but the only real thing stopping me from doing exactly that is money to begin with. The same could be said for restoratives, which already don't serve much of a purpose next to the healing spells, which already trivialize their existence. It just ends up contributing to a game loop where I have to pause to assess my inventory for little to no reason, or decide to go back to town and sell my useless stuff too frequently, breaking the pacing and flow of the gameplay up way too much. Pacing is a bit of a mess in general. The game was still designed to be played in short bursts, and I think the way it's been handled in a lot of ways ended up hurting it, since the intended bursts may be too small. Bosses melt so fast they usually don't feel any different from a regular fight, and the gigantic enemy groups often still go down in a single turn, and the story, well, there's entire worlds where it feels like the setup for the dungeon took 2 sentences and it didn't really matter in the end. There's a few worlds where you don't even get that much preparation ahead of time. The harder bonus side dungeon is something that is just thrown at you in the critical path with an NPC standing there telling you there's no reason to go through this dungeon. The best way to put the way the story unfolds and how much of it is there would be the words bare minimum. And even then, that's overselling how much the game has going for it in this regard most of the time. It's more about the thought or gesture towards a story concept than really having one. And sometimes that can work, like with the first SaGa title, but sometimes it just doesn't work, like in this game. And I really wonder what the difference is between the two. Part of me makes me think that it's the steps taken to improve the presentation and not much of anything else. Even remade on the Wonderswan, the first SaGa game still felt somewhat humble in appearance, fitting what the game was doing. With the full 3D character models, the larger battle animations, the wider audio range, and the large amount of party customization, it's a bit jarring how bare bones a lot of the game feels. Even with all the combat mechanics I've gone over, fights still typically only take up about 2 turns, which makes them range from a minute to 30 seconds based on whether or not you're fast forwarding the animations, a feature that to me suggests that the developers are well aware that the new animations they were making the pacing uneven. It feels especially bad when you're in a large fight with more than 10 enemies and they all have their turns ahead of you, so you know that you're watching each and every single animation before you even get to move. I'd probably feel a bit different about this if I wasn't recording for YouTube and I'd just turn off all battle animations, though that wouldn't negate the RNG and menu problems I was having, which feels like an unfortunate problem to have considering that this game isn't even that hard outside of a few boss fights. Something that I really did appreciate though is that you can save your game everywhere, and there's multiple save slots. There are moments where backtracking is impossible, and the game even warns you about this when you are attempting to save in a place where you could get stuck in an unwinnable position. Even then, I can't bring myself to recommend SaGa 2 Hihou Densetsu. A lot of the snappiness of the older title is lost, and the Nintendo DS's 3D isn't as fun to play with as a proper 2D RPG. Combat is way too easy for most of the game and starts feeling like a chore when the enemy count starts to increase over time as you're waiting for your screen nuke to solve the problem. And there isn't a story to really help you pull past all these shortcomings. It's a shame the 4th SaGa game I cover turned out to be so far my least favorite. Not going to call it outright bad, but it's not good enough to play over other RPGs on the system or other entries in the franchise unless you're really starved for another Akitoshi Kawazu game. There isn't much of a reason to experience this one in this form. I heard the 3rd remake is a lot better, but it'll probably be a while before I'll touch that so I can have some distance between the games. Anyway, this was AboveUp, and hey, we did it. I finally got a video out. I've had a really rough time lately regarding time in general. I've been working 6-day work weeks, and pretty much all of that is unscheduled. I just get called right before I have to go to work, and then I work, and then I don't have energy or time to really work on it. So I'm kind of surprised that I managed to get through this game, while also playing Resident Evil 2 and Kingdom Hearts 3, which are great, by the way, if you're wondering what my opinion on those two is. I love them a lot so far. I hope you enjoyed these new transition animations that I made and this new background that I made for the end screen. Kind of moving away from the Gundam stuff that I had in the background for a while, to, you know, kind of be more consistent with everything that I've got going on this channel. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/AboveUp, like the names that you see scrolling on the screen right now. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see ya.